Now, sources have claimed that Prince Andrew and his ex-wife Sarah Ferguson have been told they are not welcome at the royal family's Christmas celebrations amid fresh allegations surrounding their involvement.
Prince Andrew thought he could quietly slip back into Windsor and reclaim a shred of the status he once commanded. Instead, what happened inside those walls has left the palace buzzing, and Andrew humiliated in a way he never imagined possible. The bows were gone. The respect was gone. And the one thing he believed he could still control slipped right through his fingers. Tonight, we uncover what really happened during Andrew's disastrous return and why insiders say he's spiraling fast.
Yes, so this is according to a report in the London Sunday Times that Prince Andrew and Fergie will not be invited to Sandringham. Now, I don't generally advise anyone to avoid church, but in Andrew's case, maybe he could spend a little more time in church privately rather than making headlines next to his very thing.
Prince Andrew's latest humiliation at Windsor is not an isolated moment. It's the clearest evidence yet that the monarchy is done protecting him. And if you're watching this, pay attention. Because what happened inside Windsor Castle is more than awkward silence and withheld bows. It's a public verdict delivered in private corridors, and it tells us exactly where Andrew stands now. Because let's be honest, when a man who once demanded deference walks into his childhood home and is met with stiff shoulders, straight backs, and the cold, Mr. Mountbatten Windsor, that's not a small slip in protocol. That is the institution saying loudly and deliberately, your era is over. And here's the part many people miss. This shift didn't begin with the emails or the scandals. It began the moment Andrew lost the one thing he relied on more than titles or medals: involuntary respect. The kind people gave because they had to, not because he earned it. And if you think that's the worst of it, keep watching, because it gets even more brutal. When staff refuse to bow, when guards look away, when the palace kitchen stops sending food, that's not punishment, that's exile in slow motion. Andrew built his world on hierarchy, superiority, and entitlement. So when the hierarchy flips, and the people he once barked orders at now hold the power to humiliate him, simply by standing upright, the psychological blow is enormous. This is Windsor closing its doors without ever locking them. It's a message that doesn't need to be spoken. But where it all collapses is the emails, and this is where the entire story turns. Those leaked messages didn't just expose Andrew's panic. They exposed the truth the monarchy never wanted to confirm. He wasn't distancing himself from Epstein. He was coordinating, pleading, and strategizing. And now the palace is desperate to separate itself before more evidence surfaces. So here's the bottom line. Andrew isn't just losing privileges. He's losing the illusion of who he thought he was. Windsor's silence has spoken. The monarchy has moved on. And Andrew is standing alone in a story he can no longer control.
Let's bring you some breaking news that has come to us in the last minute or so from Buckingham Palace. His Majesty the King has today initiated a formal process to remove the style, titles and honours of Prince.
The breaking news coming out of Buckingham Palace tonight marks the most severe and irreversible blow in Prince Andrew's long, painful fall from grace. King Charles has formally initiated the process to strip Andrew of all styles, titles and honours, a step that goes beyond anything previously imposed. Andrew will no longer be known as Prince Andrew, Duke of York. He is now officially Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, a private citizen in name, in status, and in standing. This announcement did not come out of nowhere. It is the culmination of weeks of escalating scrutiny, revived allegations, and internal pressure from both the public and senior royals. But what many people do not realize is that this formal stripping of titles was already foreshadowed at Windsor, where Andrew's most humiliating moment unfolded just days before the palace made this announcement. When Andrew returned to Windsor Castle recently, he expected at least the familiar buffer of deference. Even after losing his working role, he still relied on gestures of royal respect, the nods, the subtle bows, the polite formality, to maintain the illusion that he was still part of the inner royal circle. Instead, what he walked into was a silent, symbolic verdict. Staff who once bowed kept their heads level. Guards who once offered crisp salutes looked straight ahead. And those who had always addressed him as Your Royal Highness were instructed, and reportedly eager, to address him as Mr. Mountbatten Windsor. This was the monarchy's internal trial, and the verdict was humiliation.
But again, over the last couple of weeks, and with further allegations around Prince Andrew, his links to the sex offender Jeffrey Epstein, there has been intense scrutiny.
For a man who built his identity on hierarchy and obedience, Windsor's cold reception was the moment everything shifted. Only a few years ago, Andrew strode through these halls radiating authority. He barked orders. He demanded instant service. Former aides have openly described his infamous impatience, the hurry-up barked at staff, the temper, the entitlement. These same people now stood upright in front of him, allowed for the first time to drop the performance. What happened at Windsor was not a random change in tone. It was a controlled collapse of Andrew's remaining symbolic power. Royal status is built on performance, the bow, the greeting, the formality. Remove those, and the aura vanishes. By the time Andrew completed that uncomfortable walk through Windsor, it was already clear that the palace had decided to position him as an outsider. Tonight's announcement simply puts into law what the staff's behavior had already made clear in practice. The palace's statement is blunt. The king has initiated a formal process to remove Andrew's style, titles, and honors. Up until now, Andrew's titles were voluntarily set aside, dormant but not gone. Tonight's move makes them permanently revoked. And this matters because voluntary withdrawal was reversible. This is not. It is a formal erasure of identity in the royal system.
Because he paid up a huge amount of money up front, but it meant that he wasn't paying any rent or a peppercorn rent over the years that he has.
But the humiliation does not stop with the titles. Andrew's 75-year lease on Royal Lodge, his sprawling 30-room mansion in Windsor Great Park, has now been forcibly terminated. Formal notice has been served. His legal protection to remain there, despite paying only peppercorn rent after an upfront renovation payment, has expired. Andrew is being physically removed, not quietly relocated. The optics are intentional. Windsor was Andrew's last stronghold. Royal Lodge was his safe zone, his fortress of privilege, and his symbol of lingering influence. Losing it is more than a housing matter. It is the monarchy stripping him of place, proximity, and presence. He is being pushed out of Windsor, out of visibility, and out of relevance. That is why the palace emphasized where he is going, a private property on the Sandringham estate funded by the kings. It is still royal land, but it is physically distant and socially isolating, a controlled environment far removed from the central royal ecosystem. This decision is not just administrative. It is reputational triage. The continuous scrutiny around Andrew's links to Jeffrey Epstein, intensified by recent revelations and renewed public anger, has become untenable. Each new allegation, whether denied or not, forces the king's hand. The monarchy simply cannot carry the weight of Andrew's scandals without risking institutional damage, and the statement's closing line drives that point home. Their Majesty's thoughts and utmost sympathies remain with the victims and survivors of abuse. This is the palace drawing a permanent line between the crown and Andrew, morally, publicly, and legally. So tonight marks the moment Prince Andrew ceases to exist in the royal hierarchy. What remains is Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, a private citizen moved out of Windsor, stripped of honors, and no longer shielded by the symbolic power he relied on for decades. The Windsor episode showed the cracks. The palace's announcement has now broken the foundation. Andrew has not just lost titles. He has lost identity, privilege, and the last remnants of deference, the very things he believed he could never be separated from.
And I think we need to know why Andrew's not paying any rent.
And where did he get a total of £8.5 million in 2005?
Yeah, because
did we pay for it?
Well, no, don't think the Mail are reporting today that he did not get a major inheritance from the Queen or the Queen Mother.
One of the most damaging threads in Prince Andrew's downfall, and one the public keeps returning to, is the question no one at the palace wants to answer. Where did the money come from? For nearly 2 decades, Andrew has lived at Royal Lodge under a 75-year lease that required an upfront payment of roughly $7 to $8 million for renovations. But new reporting shows he did not receive a large inheritance from the Queen Mother, despite widespread assumptions. In fact, his request was small. So the obvious question stands: how did a man with a modest naval pension and no substantial private income produce millions in cash? This financial mystery fuels an even larger problem. Andrew has been living in a 30-room royal property for the equivalent of peppercorn rent, subsidized indirectly by the crown, a state, while the public covers its operating and security costs. What began as a quiet arrangement has now erupted into a political and reputational crisis. Members of Parliament are openly demanding transparency. The Public Accounts Committee has asked whether allowing Andrew to stay rent-free in such a vast property is value for money. That question alone shows how unsustainable the arrangement has become, and this brings us to Windsor, the epicenter of Andrew's most humiliating chapter. Staff behavior toward him has shifted sharply. People who once bowed stood upright. Greetings were replaced with stiff neutrality. The atmosphere made one thing clear. Whatever remained of his royal aura evaporated the moment Epstein's name returned to headlines.
A newly surfaced email to convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein casts fresh light on claims involving Andrew Mountbatten Windsor. The message from Epstein's associate, Ghislaine Maxwell, appears to suggest the disgraced royal received a massage at her Belgravia home.
Windsor Castle had always been Andrew's psychological fortress, the place where rank still carried weight. Losing that silent respect was not symbolic, it was structural. It marked the moment the institution internally acknowledged him as a liability, not an asset. And once that line was crossed inside the castle, a formal restructuring of his status was inevitable. His connection to Jeffrey Epstein remains the overpowering force in Andrew's collapse. The scandal has returned with renewed intensity, fueled by fresh allegations, resurfaced images, and most damagingly, new communications showing Andrew's frantic involvement behind the scenes. This did more than reignite public outrage. It destroyed what little credibility he had left. His repeated denials now stand alongside evidence of private panic, coordination, and desperation. For the monarchy, that contradiction is catastrophic. Add the financial inconsistencies, the peppercorn rent arrangement, and unanswered questions about the original $8 million payment, and the palace was boxed into a corner. The institution relies on public trust. Protecting Andrew, financially or symbolically, would erode that trust. King Charles's decision to revoke Andrew's titles, force him to surrender Royal Lodge, and reclassify him as Andrew Mountbatten Windsor is not a moral stance. It is institutional survival.
My mother used to own this building, so I assumed the money so when she died, I thought perhaps he inherited money from the Queen Mother, which would enable him to do those improvements. But he apparently had a very minor bequest from the Queen Mother. So where did the money...
But another crack in Andrew's life is widening quietly. His relationship with Sarah Ferguson. For years, Andrew and Sarah functioned as an unofficial partnership, sharing Royal Lodge and presenting a united front amid scandal. She defended him in interviews, stayed publicly loyal, and benefited from the stability that the residence provided. But now that he's being removed from Royal Lodge and relocated to a private property on Sandringham, that dynamic is collapsing. Sources close to the family indicate that Sarah has grown increasingly frustrated, not just with the financial uncertainty, but with Andrew's inability to adapt, his insistence he did nothing wrong, and the social fallout she now faces by association. Their once eccentric bond, tolerated by the late Queen, is unraveling under the weight of practical realities, new housing arrangements, public hostility, private shame, and the undeniable fact that Andrew brings relentless scrutiny to anyone standing near him.
Prince Andrew, that is, now just Andrew Mountbatten Windsor, who has been stripped of his prince title and is being forced out of the Royal Lodge. Of course, it comes weeks after it was announced that King Charles's younger brother would no longer use his Duke of York title. Well, you know what? Good riddance, Tanya. I mean, there's been scandal after scandal.
When you connect the dots, the picture becomes clear. The rent controversy exposed financial inconsistencies. The Windsor humiliation exposed institutional rejection. The Epstein scandal exposed contradictions and panic. The title removal exposed the king's final break with his brother. And the deterioration of Andrew's relationship with Sarah exposes the personal cost of a life built on entitlement, now collapsing under its own weight. Andrew is not only losing status, titles, residence, and privilege, he is losing the last people, structures, and illusions that once protected him.